Welcome to a new episode of Beyond the Pages, and today we have Ian. Ian, welcome to the show.
Hi, Deborah. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So, to start directly, tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Ian, and I live in Liverpool in the United Kingdom. And my first book was published, where are we? Well, literally a month ago today, the 20th of February, technically, was when it came out. And it's been a long old journey for me, getting this to print. It's been about 8 years of writing and editing and re-editing and more writing. So it's nice to finally have it in the world and be able to actually speak about it and have people come back to me with what they think of the whole thing.
Okay, so tell us a bit about your book. What is it about?
Yeah, sure. So we found ourselves in London, 1969, in a world in which the Nazis won the Second World War. So they've occupied Great Britain and Europe and Africa and parts of Asia, established governments, and they've been in control now for more or less 3 decades, getting close to anyway. Now, the story itself, the central premise, is a young detective sergeant in the Metropolitan Police who's been assigned to a task force whose job it is to stop a new fashionable drug called Yonder, which has been taken on by the working class population of Great Britain, who obviously never settled under a Nazi rule and want to rebel, but don't have the power to do so. So it's been taken on as kind of a silent protest, so they can free themselves spiritually from this world. But obviously that is not what the government wants to happen. So they've created these task forces to try and stop it, and John finds himself a part of that. Now, what I've been calling the unique selling point of this book is that generally in other novels in this genre, the main character will be someone who is against the regime. They understand the evils of Nazism and will inevitably, in one way or another, try and overthrow the regime to save the world from this dystopian future. My character, John Highsmith, is not that character. It's not a redemption story for him. He is a card-carrying, flag-waving National Socialist. He's been raised under the regime since he was a child, basically since birth. So he is what we would define as a Nazi. He follows those ideologies and believes they saved Europe and liberated Great Britain during the war. So it's a real investigation, a deep dive on what might have happened to someone. I mean, in this book, he's 29.
Yeah.
What would have happened to a young man of that age had they been raised under this government and under this regime, and kind of like the dangers of what that would result in.
Okay, sounds really interesting. So would you classify it like more as a dystopian? Because there are, I assume, some historical pointers as well.
Yeah. So it's odd. We obviously, as the reader, can immediately identify that this is a dystopia.
Yeah.
But he, as the character, kind of believes it's a utopia, or as close to he's getting. He believes he's living in this kind of perfect world where everything he believes is true. So yeah, we as the reader know that this is this is a really evil time, but he as the character doesn't see it that way, and it's quite a difficult read sometimes, I think.
So did it inspire you to write a story from the opposite point of view, from actually a Nazi side of what happened in the world 70 years ago?
So I was a history student, so I spent hours and hours and days and weeks just engrossed in 20th century world politics, and in particular the Second World War. And inevitably you do get that what if question. What if this had happened, that had happened? In certain points, the whole thing seems to just spin on a coin toss, which way it would have gone. So obviously that then leads me to the fiction of that genre. You've got your really big names like the Man in the High Castle, SSGB, and then Fatherland, the Robert Harris book.
Yeah.
In each of those stories, it is written from that perspective of a character who is against the regime. They understand that it's evil, and inevitably they will work to try and bring down this government.
Mm.
Even the other ones I read, I never saw it being analysed from this perspective. And that was kind of the inspiration initially, was this could actually be something new. Now, it's because it's so difficult to think of a new story, something a bit unique to kind of tell a new tale almost.
Mm.
So that initial idea of this might actually be new was, okay, let's try it and see where it goes. And it built from there into this actually might have something to say almost. Like it might have something to say about society and politics and the dangers of fascism. So the initial inspiration was, I might actually have something that hasn't been done before.
I don't think it's ever been done before. Normally we choose the side of the good ones, to say the least, instead of like the Nazi point of view. So how difficult was it for you to dive into a character that is actually looking through those pink glasses, thinking like, oh, this is the Nazi Reich and this is the way it's supposed to be, because we all know our history. So how difficult was that for you?
That was the key challenge throughout the whole narrative, is making sure that John remains a relatable character.
Mm-hmm.
Making him, it's trying to find a bit of a duality in the character. On the one hand, he's a young, hard-working man. He's a father to be. He's kind. There are moments where he shows he's kind and empathetic. And as far as he's concerned, he just wants to do his job to the best of his ability. He thinks he's protecting people. He thinks he's protecting the people he serves as a police officer. It's then every so often just bringing this other side of his personality in. At the beginning, it's quite subtle. It's notes here and there, little expressions, little like internal monologues that come in that just remind the reader that, oh, he's this, this, and this, but he's also a National Socialist. He has these ideologies, and it's making sure to keep him as likable as possible on the other side. So then when this other side comes in, it's like, oh no, hang on, you can actually be both. And I used a lot of myself in him to kind of build like anxieties and different like thought processes and hopes and dreams and what he wants from life.
Yeah.
To then just needle in this other side of being like, this is what I consider to be like normal characteristics, and then hit him with the whole Nazi part, and it becomes a bit of a, as I say, it's okay, you can be both at the same time, and it's trying to pull the reader's sympathies back and forth all the way to the final line, where it's, do I like him? Do I not like him? Do I feel bad for him when bad things happen? Do I feel good for him when good things happen? But then that good thing is a bad thing. It's trying to really pull the reader back and forth.
Well, I think it's an interesting concept because we all, and I think because we know what happens. Like if I look at stories from children born in Germany joining the SS, or in Europe anyways, or occupied Europe, there were still a lot of people who actually believed that what the Nazis were doing was a good thing, and that it was like a liberation for Europe and people being poor, things like that. So it's not even that far from the truth. And when you look, when you look nowadays, well,
it was the long it took me 8 years to finish it, and the longer it took me to finish it, the more relevant it became to modern society, which was just a little bit terrifying, to be honest. It became slowly more pertinent to the actual culture at the moment.
Yeah.
So, as I said, that initial idea of I might have something unique here and something to say now is actually maybe holds a bit more value than it did even a decade ago.
90 years ago. So, what was it that it took so long to finish? Just your time for writing, or really the research that actually goes into writing this story?
So I had a lot of the research anyway because I'd studied that period. It made perfect sense to just kind of fall into a historical fiction. It was there waiting to be used. I think the reason it took me so long was it started as a hobby. It was just one, like, a rainy afternoon, some October, where I was like, I've had this idea, I've got a bit of time, I'll start writing.
Yeah.
And then I carried on writing. I was like, oh, this is quite fun. I'm enjoying like the world building and the research and this, that, the other. I think I got to the end of a first draft after about 2.5 years. And I was like, okay, I've actually got something quite good here. The rest of that time was going back and rewriting and redrafting and just making it, trying to build this thing that had started as a hobby at the age of 22 into something that 30-year-old me thought was actually good enough to take into publication. So I was still editing 22-year-old me's ideas 8 years later. And it's when you realise I had no idea what I was talking about. I had no idea what I was doing. And it was just stripping down all these things. I thought that was a really good idea. Like, it absolutely wasn't a good idea. That needs to go. But I've found it 6 years later. It's like, okay, we need to take that out and change it. It's just getting it to the point where I felt like it was good enough. It just took a lot of like editing and rewriting and just developing my own style to an extent, and then giving it time in between the edits to kind of settle and think about it. And I'd like to think going in, if I went into another one now, knowing the process and knowing what I'd want to say, it wouldn't take as long. But that it's just it just got away from me a little bit, and then life gets in the way and work and this and that. So yeah, there's always something in the way as well. So there's 6-month periods where I didn't look at it.
No.
But then eventually it come back to me with some fresh eyes, which does help, to be honest, giving it that time to just percolate it. It does help.
It's a learning process as well. Yeah, like, and especially the rewriting and the editing. I think most writers actually spend more time rewriting it than anything else, just perfecting it to be the story what it is now. So when you look back at like your life, like you were a history student, so even though it was a rainy October, like, why was the writing, why did it draw you in? Was it just like, oh, I'm bored, or was it actually something you enjoy doing?
I've always been a bit of a writer. I've always imagined being a writer. I always wrote when I was little, like on paper, and then I wrote a whole fantasy book when I was a teenager. That's never going to see the light of day. It's buried on a USB somewhere. But it was always I was working on. It's back to. I haven't looked at it. I haven't looked at that in over a decade actually. So it's there somewhere. But it's always something I've done. I've written poetry and short stories as well, and I like creating. I like being creative. If I could draw and paint, I'd draw and paint. If I could play music, I'd be writing songs, but I can't clap in time. So I've never been able to pick up an instrument and actually do anything with it. I'm quite useless. So, but writing was always something I felt comfortable doing. Always something I felt I had a bit of a knack for. So it was always something I wanted to do, but it was finding the subject that really held me. Yeah. Like, again, trying to write a fantasy book. I enjoy fantasy, but I'm not like in that world. Whereas I imagine if I'd grown up just living in Tolkien and stuff like Harry Potter or Wheel of Time, if I lived in those worlds, it would have been a lot more straightforward. But it was always, it was just difficult for me to try and find something in that genre.
Okay.
And to kind of make something that felt new. It just wasn't my genre. But then after doing the history degree, it felt right. It felt natural. It felt easy to slip into this historical fiction genre. I always wanted to write something, and this was just the thing that really held my attention.
And when you, because you took the Second World War, is that something that you were always interested about, like especially that time in history?
Yeah. It's something which, like the history curriculum in Britain, really focuses on. That whole period, the First World War, the interwar period, the Second World War. It's something you spend a lot of time looking at as a kid. So for me, it just naturally became an interest. And then when I went to university, I went over the same things and just got deeper into that period. I'm more interested. You get really like specific details and specific characters and people and events. And it's such a brutal, violent moment in world history where feasibly it could have gone the other way. That concept of what might have happened, as I said earlier, it becomes a fascination, just because there's so few moments in history where it's like, okay, that really did spin on a dime. So yeah, that whole period just became a fascination, where I then felt that this whole what if scenario, having been done before, just again became an interest.
Which characters are your favorite characters, like in developmental and just their journey throughout the story?
So it's slightly weird to have favorite characters in this book, because I don't think there are any characters who are straight up morally correct, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, even when the characters who would usually be like the good guys in this scenario, people who want to bring down the regime, people who want to fight against the Nazis, the things we come to realize they do, the idea of good versus evil isn't black and white. It's very, very grey. It's what extent would you go to bring down this regime comes into question. And so having a favourite character is quite difficult, because they all do some pretty nasty things by the end of the book. But there's one character in particular who's only used quite sparingly through the narrative, a character called Ziegler. He only appears, I think, 3 or 4 times throughout the whole thing, but towards the end, the third to last chapter, we find out what happened to him. He's older. He's an older detective inspector who's working with John, and we find out what happened to him during the war. And I think that is my favourite chapter, because it was really interesting to research, like how it was different. So he's involved in the invasion of Soviet Russia in 41. And it was interesting to kind of research how it went differently in this timeline and what happened to him. And I never expected that character to kind of get this level of depth. He was kind of he'd been introduced as just another character to kind of build out this task force John's involved in. And when I got to this point, I needed something to break the narrative a bit, to kind of let the reader take a breath and just absorb what happened in the previous chapter, which is quite a big chapter. So it made perfect sense to bring him back And it was like, so what can this character talk about? And this idea of this older man talking about what happened to him during the war and how it affected him. All of a sudden, he just gained this real depth of character that I really didn't expect him to have when I kind of thought him up. And as I said, that chapter just became really interesting to write. And every time I go back to it to edit it, I'm just really like content with it, with how it turned out and the character he builds into, kind of accidentally.
What would you think, like, if you're looking at your reading patterns or books that you like, who would be like an inspirational author for you?
So go back to these same books in this genre. I do think Robert Harris, who wrote Fatherland, which was his first book as well. So his first book was an alternate history, Nazis won the war topic. I've always enjoyed his writing style and the way he builds his characters and his settings. It feels really, it read very naturally to me. Like sometimes you can read an author and it's quite dense and difficult to really get on with them. Yeah. But his writing always just felt just smooth. Like so he's always someone I've been quite a fan of and enjoyed his other works as well. And then Philip K. Dick as well, who wrote The Man in the High Castle.
Yeah.
Like that's excellent. And then his other stuff, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is one of my favourites and is really just like weird and dense sci-fi. Like I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, but his work has always been something I've really enjoyed because it's just everything is unique and just weird. Like it's always, and for him to have written this alternate history book, it just seems so like out of nowhere. So it's like it really kind of takes you by surprise to be part of his bibliography. So that it's just I've always just seen it as quite a weird aberration that I really enjoyed.
And when you could give advice to any aspiring writers after your 8-year journey writing and making your story perfect, like what would you advise new writers to do?
The biggest piece of advice I think I can give is to try and enjoy it, particularly those early days when you are building characters and settings and just like constructing a world of your own. Just enjoy it. Particularly those early times when you can just play with it, nothing's set in stone. You haven't decided exactly who the characters are maybe and where they're going to go. Enjoy playing with it. Enjoy going back and changing things and seeing where the story takes itself. I didn't go in with a writing plan, which is also why it took so long. I had absolutely no idea where it was going or what it was doing until much later in the process.
Yeah.
But that is quite fun. It's quite fun to just see where the story takes itself. And there were certain times where I was like, I want it to go this way. Like, we're going this way. And the story's like, we're not going that way. We are absolutely not going that way. I don't want to go that way. And I had to take myself back. The way I found in the end, whenever I came up against like a bit of writer's block, it wasn't writer's block as such. It was me trying to take the story in a direction it didn't want to go in. So I always found that go back to the last point where it made sense.
Yeah.
And start again from there. And eventually be like, okay, this is where we want to go that way. This is the story that it wants to tell. I've been taking it in entirely the wrong direction. And it does kind of kill you when you then have to strip out like 12,000 words of writing and research. But eventually it sounds weird, but the story knew where it wanted to go.
It doesn't sound weird at all.
Eventually, it really naturally fell into place. It was like, okay, that's where I knew where I wanted to get to. So it's like the whole final act I basically threw out and started again and just took out the bits that I needed to keep. I lost like 3 chapters worth of work, and the whole middle section was just fluff and nonsense and just didn't need to be there. It was just like, I thought this was a dead good idea, and it turns out it was just all wrong.
Yeah,
it just completely made no sense to like the overall plot. It was just getting in the way of finishing the book. I know I've gone completely on a tangent here, but again, just that's the piece of advice. Enjoy it and let the story tell itself, and just see where it goes. Don't. I know some people say go in with a strict plan. You've got to go A, B, C, D, E. Let it play with it. Just don't be so. I wouldn't be so strict with it, because I tried, and eventually it turns out it just didn't work.
So what did you enjoy the most? Was it the character building, or would you say the world building?
Originally, it would be the world building, because there is so much you can do with that setting and that world, and you can kind of let your imagination run wild with the idea of where would we be at this point, what might have happened, what new rules would be in place, what new governments would be in place, and then expanding it to. So in my story, like, the Nazis have basically taken over the middle of the world. They've got Europe, Africa, and then part of Asia.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese have taken over like all the East, or like the Eastern Asia, Southeast Asia, all that area. And then America still exists. It have basically built this bubble around North and South America. And it's building to, okay, so where would they sit politically? Where would we be at this point? Who would the president be? What would the interpolitics, like the geopolitical landscape be? So you can really start to build out from very granular details of where's John? What's he doing? What does he think? What does he believe? Where does, he works for the police. What are they doing? What is the attitude of the police in this situation? So all the way from the really personal detail to the much wider, where do we sit globally? So that world building was sometimes just fun, really, to really dig into and go a little bit. Let your imagination just run wild with it and just think, how far can we push this? But still, base it in that research and reality. So obviously start to take some liberties, but really try and go around it. So it was like a fun task, like a fun mental task, to just really play around with it and see where we could go with it.
Okay, so are there any new projects in the pipeline? Or after all these years, you're like, please let me just enjoy this for a while.
So I've got a basic idea of where I would take a sequel. I wrote a chapter and a half about 12 months ago. It was there was a little period between where I did my final draft and then sent it to Troubadour, the publisher, and was waiting for them to come back with their edit.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a nice little period there where I couldn't do anything. There was nothing going on with the marketing or anything like that. It was just a quiet time. So I started coming up with this idea of where the sequel would go, and who the characters might be, and where in the world would we be. And then the edit came back with 12,000 edits on it, which then became just a huge job. I ended up spending 3 solid months, just every spare moment on the edit.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to the end of that, I was basically quite ill. So I couldn't go. I basically just put everything into that edit. And since then, it's been like, no, I can't start something else right now. It took so much out of me getting this one out the door. And just now getting to the point where I'm starting to get that itch again. Now that this one's done and it's out, and I'm starting to get really positive feedback on it. I'm starting to get like, okay, so maybe I'm not terrible at this for a start. And maybe there will be a little bit of a market for a sequel. And now I'm really starting to get that idea of might just be time to start writing again.
It will be a good one. So would it like really go on where John left, or would you pick like completely different characters?
The original idea up to now is different characters to kind of expand the world and see some different perspectives on where we are in this setting, just to kind of expand the just to expand the whole world, basically the whole world of the story and the book, and just see where else we can go with it.
It sounds very excited, and I hope you will actually continue. Thank you so much for showing us like a little peek behind the curtains on how this journey has been for you. People buy the book, so you can find a link under here in the comments. And on our blog as well, plus some other questions that Ian has been answering, just to give us a bit of a deeper look inside of his writing journey. And Ian, thank you so much for being here. It was absolutely a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. Okay, guys, I will see you next time in the new episode of Beyond the Pages. Thank you. Bye.